So that all being said, we're going to talk about edible landscaping. My name is Linda Lindquist. I'm a master gardener with Rutherford County, and that means I've taken that class. And I also work for Extension up in the office, so I do both things. But does anybody have any idea of what edible landscaping might be? Okay, well, we're going to learn. Basically, it's bringing plants that not only have beauty that we're looking for in our landscape, but also give us something a little more back, a little bit of bounty, if you will. A lot of didn't come out too good, but this is eat your yard. Well, this isn't what it means. You're not going to eat your grass. What we're doing is bringing edibles out of a dedicated garden bed, our vegetable garden, and we're bringing it out of the backyard, maybe into the front yard or the side yard, and just incorporating it with the foundation landscape plants that we already have, or maybe replacing some of those with edibles that you can choose from. Why do people want to do this? This movement of edible landscaping started over a decade ago. A lady named Rosalind Creasy wrote a book, Edible Landscaping, out west. I think she's from Seattle, in Seattle and Washington area. It's very, very popular out there, and it's spreading this way because it's more resource-oriented. It takes less water instead of watering the landscape, which just sits there and looks nice, you hope, and then you've got your garden and maybe your flowers. It's all in one space. So it makes better use of your resources, it makes better use of your space. Frankly, we don't all have time to work a big garden or need a big garden anymore. A couple of tomato plants is all my family needs anymore, so I don't need to go out and till and prepare a whole big garden for that. And you can get a lot more variety doing this too. This is an example of an edible garden area. It's a pretty flower bed. It looks like a pretty flower bed. The landscaping is nice, but that's an artichoke. That's some lavender, and that's some chard. Now, the one thing you want to think about when you're preparing, and we'll talk about preparing it more, is make sure you can harvest what you planted. So, you know, you want to be able to get to it. That's one thing you want to watch for. One thing about doing this with the flowers that attract pollinators, and then you've got foliage plants and the chard, scented plants with the lavender, is that interplanting helps reduce pests and disease because you've got a greater variety. If you've got a whole row of beans and you get bean flea beetles or something, you're decimated. And they're going to go from one to the other. But if you have beans and are using them as a vine plant in your landscaping, they may not find that. The disease may not land on it, so it helps that. And also by incorporating this variety, you're creating pollinator islands. And one thing we're finding with our populations, not just of bees, but of spiders and moths and the hummingbirds and the butterflies, is that their habitats are being reduced. They're not eliminated, they're just made smaller. And they don't have as many plants to choose from in their diet. They don't have as many insects to choose from in their diet. The protein makes up a great portion of their, especially the birds, their diet. And this helps give them some resources that might not have otherwise been there. Flowers do great, but flowering vegetables do better. So also, when you're doing this concept, you grow what you like. If you have any questions, just holler. So to get started with edible landscaping, the first thing you want to do is make a plan. Just like landscaping your yard, you want to look at what areas you have. You want to think about what your family likes to eat. Just like with the garden, why plant it if they don't eat it, if they don't like it, unless you're just planting it for the decorative value. I personally don't like rhubarb, but it's a great plant in the garden. But then I plant hostas and I don't eat them, so you know, it's no different. You want to make sure what space you can have. You need to have 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, just like a vegetable garden. Here's an example of a plan. You've got the house, and they've looked at their sun. They've got some blueberry bushes here. My pointer's not working, so I'll use my finger the old-fashioned way. A shrub of lavenders working through it, some rose, which is an herb and decorative too, oregano in here, and strawberries over here. So that's all very colorful. Some of it's perennial, some of it's annual, but all together it makes a very nice carpet of color and texture. And you can go out there, and the blueberries you can eat, the apples you can eat, the lavender you can use in recipes. Oregano and strawberry are all edible. Here's another plan for a smaller bed, just to give you some ideas, and that's all I'm really trying to do today, is give you some ideas. They have some chocolate mint under a tree up at the top. The Bing cherry, this is another zone illustration, so you could use a tart cherry, a plum, an apple instead. But everything else will grow here. The lemon balm, blueberries, summer squash. You don't think about that as an ornamental plant, but the blooms are beautiful, and the vining is beautiful. It's an annual, you'll have to plant it every year, but it still gives you those ideas. But they have some corn in there for height and texture. Cucumber, beans on a pole, we'll see more of that later. And here they have a big area dedicated to cantaloupe. It's going to look lovely, but instead of a flower bed, they have a pretty vegetable bed. What don't you see there? Straight rows. Your vegetables and items are not lined up like soldiers, like we do in a traditional garden. Instead, they're grouped, just like we do with a flower garden. And you see often they're in groups of threes, odd numbers. That gives it that visual appealing sense too, just like we do with ornamental landscapes. So it's taking the best, it's taking the plants from a vegetable garden and applying them as a decorative ornamental garden, and you get the benefit of both. Research when you're planning your garden, and this is actually a good time to do this because our gardens are on the downside. We're going to be tearing them out, so what do we do all winter? We plan, we dream, and we think of what we're going to do in the spring. Kind of like baseball players. What plants grow well together? What has the same needs? You know, peppers and tomatoes, they all need a lot of sun. They have about the same water requirements, so that would be a good grouping together. Lettuces take a little less sun. You want to plant them a little earlier, and you want to make sure their water requirements are met. So you want to group them according to their requirements. Also, you want to think about what plants have just ornamental qualities, and you're going to plant them for that versus their harvesting abilities. In this case, we have some chard with some lettuce and some marigolds planted together in a raised bed. You know, you've got texture, you've got different colors of green, and actually that's a good companion planting because the marigolds will keep a lot of insects away from your lettuces. A lot of people know that they're good to plant around tomatoes because of the nematodes. They keep the nematodes out of the roots. But they're also good for other plants because they have a lot of insect repellent qualities. So you can kill two birds with one stone. Here's an idea for you. This is grouping plants with similar needs for light and sun together. You have a hedge of boxwood, but that could easily be a hedge of lavender or rosemary. You have some calendula in here, which is an herbal plant. And then we have some parsley in there, some ornamental peppers, some sage. Back here we have some Jerusalem artichoke. It's just kind of like a sunflower when it's in bloom. Big and the bright colors. Little corn over there, some basil in the back. A mixture of herbs and vegetables. And very attractive. If you're thinking of going into edible landscaping, start small. I'd advise start small in the beginning. Know where you're going to put your plants before you buy them. I'm really guilty of that. I go buy plants, stick them out beside the house, and then go back 2 weeks later and somehow they're dead. But have your pots ready if you're going to start containers. This is a great idea for containers. In this section, we have pot of gold chard here with these almost neon-like stems. Makes a great container. We have some marigolds over there, some basil, some cabbage in the back. You can't see for the glare. Carrots. Whoever thought of growing carrots in a container? all harvestable and all decorative at the same time. And that's what you're going for. Don't rip out your whole yard next week and start over. Because really what you're going to end up then is a garden in your yard, a vegetable garden in your yard. And there's nothing wrong with that if you want to do it, but it's not the ornamental look that we're trying to incorporate with the edible landscaping. After you've analyzed your landscaping needs, you can find the plants that meet them. This is out of the garden catalog, but all of these are edibles. We have, A is Jerusalem artichoke up in the corner. B is a mulberry plant. Down here in C we have a blueberry, which they've chosen to show it in its fall foliage. That's what the color, you know, you have color all year long. And then it is deciduous, it does drop its leaves but comes back. D, we have some daylilies, which we don't think of as edible, but they're on your edible flower list. Not talking too much about them today, though. E is a small rose. F is a chokeberry, edible berries. G is a little purple plum up there. That's a little rose of Sharon, again, another edible flower. A serviceberry tree, which blooms in the spring, much like a dogwood. Much like a Bradford pear. In fact, up at the extension office, people that are having problems with Bradford pears, we suggest they replace them with serviceberries. And there are small varieties that you can use in a garden like this. J is another choke cherry. K, it's in there somewhere. Here it is. That's a filbert nut tree. It'll get bigger and it'll raise the canopy, but it only gets about 6 feet tall, so it's not overwhelming. And then L is an espaliered apple that you can put up against a wall. So a nice variety, everything in there is edible and it's beautiful. But what you do want to do if you go with an edible landscape and try to incorporate that is still treat it as a garden. You're still going to need to consider your water needs, your fertilization needs. You're going to have to weed, you're going to have to take care of mulching. Insects and disease will be less, but you'll still have to monitor for that. You want to keep it cleaned up. Get your soil tested, care for it, and again, as I said before, plan for harvesting. Because all of this actually does better if you harvest it. You may be harvesting it for the compost pile if you're not going to eat it, but you still need to harvest. There's an old saying that the best thing for a garden is the gardener's shadow. So you want to spend time in your garden and really watch things. Since this is all edible, or mostly edible as you make the transition, make sure that any fertilizers you use, especially any pesticides you use, and even mulches, are safe for edible plants. Don't put anything in your landscape garden that you wouldn't put in your vegetable garden. And as you're choosing pesticides, you need to think about, well, what do you want to do with these pests? Do you want to kill them on contact? Make it a slow death with secondary contact? Do they need to eat it? They need to ingest the leaf to die. I mean, we're talking about killing bugs here. Do you want to eat it? You know, because that's what's going to happen. Do you just want to repel them? Do you want to repel them with odor? Or lure them in? It says lure and kill, but it might be lure and stay if it's beneficial bugs. Whatever you choose, make sure you read the labels. This is a fictitious label, but it's an herbicide, and we know what herbicides do. They're not pesticides. Herbicides kill the whole plant. So sometimes you want that, but not if you're just trying to get rid of whiteflies. So make sure you use the right product. That's actually a glyphosate, which is the same as Roundup. But on any label that you look for pesticide or disease control, it's going to have a days to harvest section. So read the label. If you use this particular product, I forgot what even what I chose, but for tomatoes, it says it will control spider mites and aphids. How much to use in a gallon of water? You have to wait 1 day before you harvest. That's not bad. But if you're in peas, you have to wait 3 days before you harvest. In cabbage, kale, and mustard, you have to wait 7 days before you harvest. So pay attention to your harvest dates. And The reason we talk about make sure your mulch is garden friendly is you don't want to use any newer animal compost, manure compost. You want to make sure it's well aged. I think later I'll have a date, but I think it's 4 months when you put down animal compost, cow manure, chicken manure, rabbit, that sort of thing. You want to make sure it's at least 4 months old before you eat what's grown in it, because of pathogens, diseases that might be carried forward. So what can you plant? Well, again, what do you want? Do you want food? Are you more interested in appearance? So we're going to give you some alternative plants to think about. In this case, this is some chard mixed in with the flower bed, but the red in this vein picks up the red in the salvia back there, and it's stunning. It's an annual. You're going to have to replant it every year, but you know, that's what our nurseries rely on, is replanting. Kale is a good choice. You can get kale, comes in many colors. You can get purple. Texture in that is beautiful texture. You know, if all your leaves look the same and all the green is the same, your garden becomes boring. But if you have a boxwood shrub border and you want to keep that, and you plant some kale in front of it, you've now developed 2 layers and 2 textures, and that's edible. Lettuces are great. They come in a lot of colors, everything from purple to almost black to chartreuse green. Now they're better in your cool seasons, spring and fall. In the hot summer, they'll tend to bolt, but we plant pansies the same way. You know, we don't think a thing about replacing our pansies, so don't think about it with the lettuces. Mustards, you can see the different colors in the mustard greens, and their flowers are edible too. Rhubarb, rhubarb is a great plant. You know, you get some of the red stems, but you know, we're all trying to plant the giant hosta or the giant elephant ear for the texture and the drama in it. Well, you can get the same effect with some rhubarb. Cauliflower has a very rough foliage, which gives you a lot of texture, but you can get everything from green to purple to white heads and give yourself some color in the landscape. Beets, same thing, a lot like the chard, you get a lot of the red and greens. Squash, as I said, here's some great squash plants. I think I have another picture later on that shows them in bloom, but you get huge yellow blooms from your squash, which you can actually use as a container for dip or sauces as you're serving. Edibly, they are edible. Some people dip them in batter and fry them, but you know, they're really kind of bland. They're like tofu. They don't have a taste of their own, but they make great accompaniments. Chard. You've got the red chard and then the neon brights. So you get a lot. This is beautiful in a container. Just a pot full of that is great. Jerusalem artichoke. You know, you get the daisy-like flowers, and when they're tall, they look like little sunflowers. Totally edible. You can eat them raw, you can steam them, look up recipes. And here's a traditional artichoke with its thistle-like bloom, the flower head, and then the rough foliage that gives you a lot of texture. Peppers. Sometimes the peppers tend to hide in the plant, but when they're red and colorful, you know, they're great.
Can you eat the ornamental peppers, the little?
If they're ornamental, no. If they're labeled ornamental, no. They don't have a good taste. They'll probably be bitter. So, this is lemongrass. It's an annual. You plant it every year. But, you know, instead of miscanthus or fountain grass or pampas grass, you know, you get lemongrass. And I know one of our vendors, I don't think she's here today.
Yes, she is.
She is? She usually has lemongrass.
She said she had lettuce, and tell you she had lettuce and dill and things too.
And, you know, this has, it's used a lot in Asian cooking, but it's also a great pest repellent. I did a class on herbs outside of cooking, you know, and what you can do with lemongrass is chop it up, the stems, put it in the blender with some water, and then strain that, and you spray it on yourself, and it keeps mosquitoes and flies away from you. You want to store it in the refrigerator, though, because it doesn't have any preservatives in it. Malabar spinach. I love Malabar spinach. It's a vining spinach. And it's got red stems, so you can train it up in arbor, you can train it on a fence, it takes the sun real well, it lasts longer, it doesn't die in the heat like traditional spinach that grows so low. It's got a little bit thicker leaf, so it's a little texture, it's a little different, but it's got a great taste. Great in salads, on sandwiches. Just go out and pick a handful.
Is it an annual or is that?
It's an annual, planted every year. Eggplant, not only do you have I don't have white eggplant in here, but you get, all colors and sizes of eggplant. And the blooms are much like a hollyhock. So, beans are great, not only for the blooms and the vegetable it produces, but it gives you a chance to use structure in your garden. We like to use obelisk and trellises and things to bring height into our gardens. We'll run your beans up it. Old garden gates are great for that, and we'll stick one out there and let them climb. Here's some example of beans grown on a trellis. And this is a beautiful entry. Again, it's a mixture of the two, traditional boxwoods, and you've got some growth in the containers coming in, but there's some lettuces in there, some beans. Chard is used a lot. Just to give you some ideas. Chamomile is used as a tea, but the flowers are very much like a daisy. Smaller, but make a great interest plant. It's got a ferny-like leaf to it. Let me catch up with my notes. I guess I didn't need them. Ground covers. Okay, we've seen shrubs, we've seen some trees, we've seen ornamental type plants and vines. Ground covers are a possibility too. And some are perennial and some are annual. Alpine strawberries make great ground covers. They're a little smaller than a regular strawberry, but they produce all the time and they take a little bit of shade. They'll come back. Chamomile can be used as a ground cover. Creeping mints, wintergreen, even rosemary if you buy the trailing type of rosemary versus the upright. Sweet potatoes, harvest them. They're annuals, but you get the vine covering your area, keeping your soil under control, and you get the sweet potatoes too. Not ornamental sweet potatoes. You have to make sure you get edible sweet potatoes. Ornamental sweet potatoes will make a sweet potato, but it's very starchy and has no flavor. Sweet woodruff is a great herb that very fragrant, makes a great ground cover, and you can bring it in the house and make your house smell great with it. It was, in old days, it was used to stuff mattresses, so it's very good for that. And thyme, actually I have a picture. Here's a path of thyme. It's edible, you can use it for cooking. The leaves and the flowers when it's in bloom are edible. It makes a great garden path. Now this won't stand up to your 8-year-old playing baseball on it. But if somebody steps on it, it's going to be okay too. It's just not going to take heavy traffic. But it's very, that looks a lot like in the spring, the phlox, that we see. Here's a container garden again. It's all herbs, but you can grow all the herbs you want in containers. We've got some basil in there, some chives up in the top. See, that's a big container with a smaller container sitting in it. Chives growing out the top that are in bloom. We've got some summer savory, some tarragon, some sage, some sorrel, and a pot of strawberries over there. That's on a drip system to keep them being moist. Blueberries. Somebody said they'd already started planting blueberries in their yard. Somebody over you did. They are great for containers if you don't have a lot of space. They make a nice shrub. They have great fall color. They're self-pollinating, but if you want bigger berries and more berries, you need 2 different varieties. So they'll pollinate against each other.
How big a container do you have to have?
I wouldn't do anything less than a 5-gallon. Depends on the variety you get. If you get the smaller varieties, I still would do less than a 5-gallon, but that's probably 20 in Make sure you've got them where you can water them because they need regular, adequate water. They need good drainage. They like an acid soil, so give them a little bit a higher pH. And the great thing about having them like this, if you need to throw a net over them when the birds start getting the berries, it's very easy to do.
Will they winter over in a container as well? As long as it's at least 5 gallons?
Yeah, if it's a big enough container and the roots have some insulation around them, I would mulch the top of it. And some of my containers that I worry a little bit more about, I group them together and pile some hay around them, or leaves for the winter, and they do fine. Borders. We always like to have colorful borders to edge our garden areas. This is all different kinds of basil. Same plant, same species, all these colors. We've got purple basil, lime green. This is a smaller leaf basil. There's some ornamental pepper in there. Well, it may not be ornamental, but there's some peppers in there for a little texture and color. And there's the table. But they make great borders. You're gonna have to plant them every year. But a pack of seeds costs what, $2? Rosemary makes a great border and it's perennial. You can trim it, you can shape it up. It flowers if you let it go. The flowers are edible as well. Most herbs that flower, the flowers are edible. It's just gonna taste like a milder version of the leaf. Sage is the one exception. Some of the sage flowers are bitter, but anything else you can, if it's an herb, you can eat the flower too. Some things like basil, when they go to flower, the leaves get bitter, but the flowers are still sweet. Lavender also makes a great hedge. And you can do fruit and nut trees. I would recommend it in a home landscape, if you don't have a lot of room, you look for dwarf varieties, smaller varieties that you can grow. If you want to grow in a container, these are columnar fruit trees. Instead of spreading, they go straight up. But you can see the kind of yield they're getting out of these, and these are still in nursery pots. And then espalier is a method of growing up against a wall or a fence where you cut away anything that leans out this way and just leave what grows straight up. And you may tie them up, but your yield actually gets better because putting all its growth energy into those few branches. Very decorative, can be privacy as well. Now citrus trees, there's some citrus trees in those containers. Some of those would have to be protected for the winter. You can grow nut trees as well. Like I said, filberts, they do well in this area. That's an edible nut. You want to plant 2 of those together for pollination. They only get about 6 to 8 feet tall, so they're great for a hedge if you want a privacy hedge. Pecans, walnuts, hickories are all native to Tennessee and do well in this type of environment. If you decide to plant fruit or nut trees, stop by the office and pick up a spraying schedule because that's a care that you have to give your garden, is spraying them on a regular basis so that your apples don't have worms in them or get apple scab and that sort of thing.
Office here or
Office in the front building. In the main building.
Spraying schedule?
Yeah, spraying schedule. Edible flowers, you've got a list on your handout, and you can get one on there on the table out front about edible flowers. I'm not going to go through all that because there's so many of them, but all flowers are not edible. Some are poisonous, so check them out before you decide to indulge. I gave you a list of what's edible, what you can use. A lot of them, parts are edible and parts are not tasty. I think chrysanthemums have a white center and it's bitter, so you can eat the petals. And you know, get outside the box a little bit with some of this, try it. And even if you just grow it for the color and the beauty of them, that's fine. You know, I personally don't eat a lot of flowers, but I do eat lavender. So I have a great cookie recipe with lavender in it. Here's another example of some mixture in the garden. You've got salvia here, the midnight salvia for color, but you've got a pepper plant, some other pepper plants, some sage in the background. It looks like purple sage. So it brings more texture and color into your garden. Okay, you can do this. You've got some knowledge now. I'm giving you some encouragement. Sometimes, here's another idea. Instead of bringing your garden into your landscape, take your landscape into your garden. You know, they've created a little seating area in here. You can do the same thing and incorporate some flowers and blooms into that. Just kind of mix it up. There's some lavender and rosemary and a corner bed. And that's a picture we've seen before, the Swiss chard. And this is a nice curbside bed. It's got some asters, it looks like here, some chamomile down here, and some chard in the back. And I can't quite tell what that is. There's some zinnias back there. This I love. Cabbage, leeks, broccoli, chard in the back, some Jerusalem artichoke over there, some lettuce in the front. I'm gonna knock this over one of these days. Here's an example of squash blooms on the trellis, pumpkins growing on a trellis, very architectural. That's it. Any questions? Any ideas, or have any of you tried any of this, or can think of anything to try? Okay, well, thank you for coming. Thanks for your attention. And if any of you, as I said, treat these as a garden. I do have growing vegetables in the home garden handbook. If any of you would like this, I think I've got about 15 copies, and I can get some more. And if you'd like information, if you didn't get it on the Master Gardener class, I have some handouts here. Friday will be fairy garden, so we encourage you to attend and join us there. Thank you.